Dr. Sami, in the wake of these executions, we've heard from the National Council of Resistance of Iran's president-elect, Maryam Rajavi, and other human rights defenders who warn that the regime is prepared for a broader wave of political killings, drawing on the same brutal playbook it has used in the massacre of political prisoners during the summer of 1988. So the question for you today is, what do these executions tell us about the regime's current mindset? And what should the international community do differently, especially when it comes to supporting Iran's internal resistance and holding the regime accountable?
Well, Mark, first of all, I want to thank you on behalf of OIAC for moderating this very timely panel. I know this is the second time you've joined us on these panels, and we really do appreciate it. And thank you for that question and spotlighting this very urgent crisis. The executions of Behrouz Ehsani and Mehdi Hassani are not just isolated acts of violence. They are part of a broader, deeply rooted strategy by the Iranian regime, one that relies on systematic terror, state-sponsored murder, and the brutal silencing of dissent as tools of political survival. Mr. Ehsani was 70 years old. Mr. Hassani was 48 years old. Both had spent more than 3 years in custody, and they've endured relentless torture, medical neglect, and isolation, only to be executed without warning. And as noted by Mr. Hassani's daughter, who lives in Europe, their bodies have yet to be returned to their families for proper burial. And most likely the regime will bury both in secret. So let's be clear, this was not just an execution. It was an act of calculated cruelty by a regime that has long used aging political prisoners as both hostages and as warnings. These executions are part of a broader pattern, a post-war purge carried out in the shadow of the recent 12-day conflict with the resistance movement inside Iran. And what we're witnessing is a regime lashing out in fear, trying to regain control by silencing the voices of the dissent, particularly those with a history of resistance. As was reported by the French news agency, President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Maryam Rajavi, has called this a brutal crime and warned that the regime's impunity only fuels public outrage. Her words were very clear. She says, "This brutality only intensifies the outrage of the Iranian people and reinforces the determination of Iran's courageous youth to bring an end to this theocratic tyranny." These two political prisoners' only crime was being affiliated with the MEK and refusing to renounce their commitment to a democratic, secular republic in Iran. Just like thousands before, who all faced the charge of moharebe, or waging war on God, a term that is so vague, so politically charged in religious fascism context, and has been used since the early 1980s. In the summer of 1988, this charge was used to massacre over 30,000 political prisoners, most of them MEK members, after the summary trials that lasted just mere minutes. It's the same term used in recent years to execute young protesters after the 2022 uprising. It's both a legal fabrication and a death sentence. So what makes this moment particularly alarming is the regime's timing and tone. These executions come just weeks after the end of the 12-day war with Israel and amid escalating tensions with the IAEA, the US, and Europe over the nuclear issue. They come at a time when Tehran is facing growing unrest at home over many issues, over inflation, over water shortages, and most recently, over the bread prices. People from across Iran, from teachers to retirees to bakers, are constantly protesting in the streets. And in response, the regime is doing what it always does when it feels threatened. It kills. So I argue from the top, Khamenei and his entire regime is sending a message to the people of Iran who are thinking of resisting. The message is, we can do what we did in 1988 and no one will stop us. So the real question is, we all know the record of this regime, and therefore, is silence an option? And if not, what is the role of the international community and what must be done? So I would outline this in 3 points. First, these executions are intentional, state-sanctioned political murders. They're crimes against humanity, as documented by Amnesty International, and have been going on for more than 4 decades. They've continued because the world community chose talks and negotiations with a murderous regime of mullahs. The time is long overdue for the UN Human Rights Council to initiate an urgent investigation. And in this particular case, the names of those responsible, including prison officials like Warden Allah Karam Azizi and his deputies at the Ghazal Hassar prison, must be placed on international sanctions list. The case must be referred to the International Criminal Court. Just one day before these recent executions, more than 100 armed guards from Ghazal Hassar prison's special forces, acting on orders from the warden and his deputies, Hassan Qobadi and Ismail Faraj Nejad, alongside intelligence agents, stormed the political prisoners' ward in Unit 4. In a brutal assault, inmates were beaten, bound in handcuffs and leg shackles. They had bags placed over their heads and were dragged across the floor before being forcibly taken to solitary confinement. As we sit here today, we don't know what is happening to them at this moment. So this is what the UN Human Rights Council must seek to answer and investigate. Naming and shaming these figures is a must. Second, the Western governments must fundamentally shift their approach. For too long, the policies toward Iran have prioritized diplomacy at the expense of human rights. We cannot speak of nuclear negotiations and regional de-escalation, all the while ignoring the execution of dissidents at home. The free world must adopt a human rights first policy. There are several other high-profile political prisoners, such as Saeed Massoudi, Mariam Akbari Munfared, Ali Younisi and his father, Pakhshan Azizi, Zainab Jalalian, and many more who are at risk. Some are facing forced disappearances, and some are being transferred to remote prisons without any notifications to their families. So how much longer will the world community stand by and watch such crimes in silence? Third, and most importantly, there must be a recognition of the Iranian people's right to resist tyranny, as reflected in the bipartisan majority of House resolutions. The world to believe that there is no alternative, that it's either them or chaos. But we know that that's a lie. There is an alternative. It's organized, it's democratic, it's secular, and it's embodied in the NCRI and in the leadership of a woman, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. The young people who are taken to the streets today, the prisoners who are enduring unspeakable conditions in places like Ghazal Hassar, and the families demanding justice outside prison gates, they are not just victims. They are agents of change, but they cannot stand alone. The international community has a moral and strategic obligation to stand with them. And that means amplifying their voices, supporting their resistance, and making it clear to the regime that the era of impunity is over, and that the only way to signal that to the people of Iran is to recognize their legitimate fight against Tehran's regime and the terrorist IRGC thugs. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this topic and issue, but these are the 3 must-haves in my view.